The Atlantic, 1768. Yellow fever had already claimed the captain and the first mate. The Scottish trading vessel John drifted helpless, crew staring at each other in silence. No one wanted command. They voted anyway. A 21-year-old nobody named John Paul stepped forward. What happened next no one expected. Against every odd, the boy brought the ship and its cargo home. The owners, braced for total loss, were stunned. They handed him his own vessel as reward. Overnight, a common sailor became captain. But then the real test came. On his second voyage, wages sparked mutiny. Young, eager to prove himself, John Paul dragged the ringleader on deck. He raised the cat o' nine tails. "Be grateful you even get paid what you get," he snarled. "And that goes for all of you. One swing too many." The man collapsed. The crew whispered he was dead. He wasn't, not yet. Weeks later he died anyway. John Paul was arrested for murder. He made bail, fled Scotland, and took command of a London-registered ship bound for Tobago. Old habits refused to die. Another mutiny erupted. This time he drew his sword and killed the leader outright. Now a wanted man, he abandoned ship, ran to the American colonies and vanished into Virginia. He changed his name to John Paul Jones and tried to disappear. He told himself greatness was no longer his fate. But then April 1775 arrived. British forces clashed with colonists at Lexington. The shot heard round the world. Within weeks thousands of redcoats poured into the colonies. The newborn Continental Navy put out a desperate call for experienced sailors. John Paul Jones volunteered. No one expected the fugitive murderer to become America's first naval legend. The colonies had almost nothing, a handful of converted merchant ships against the most powerful navy on earth. Direct battle meant instant death. So they turned to raiding. Jones took command of the sloop Providence, then the Alfred, then the Ranger. He struck British ports, burned ships, captured prizes. In 1779 he took the Bonhomme Richard against the superior HMS Serapis in one of the bloodiest naval fights in history. Cannon fire lit the night. His own ship was sinking beneath him. The British captain demanded surrender. Jones' reply became legend: "I have not yet begun to fight." He lashed the ships together and fought deck to deck until the British struck their colors. The Americans had won the day. John Paul Jones, the man who once killed to keep order on a merchant vessel, had just given the Revolution its most daring naval victory. While Jones dueled the Royal Navy on the open sea, another man was preparing to walk straight into hell on purpose. September 1940. Warsaw occupied Poland. The Germans had just sealed off Auschwitz. The camp was still a rumor, a place where political prisoners vanished. Witold Pilecki, a 39-year-old Polish cavalry officer and resistance fighter, made a decision no sane person would make. He volunteered to be captured. He walked into a Nazi roundup carrying false papers. They beat him, tattooed prisoner number 4859 on his arm, and shoved him behind the wire. Pilecki had not come to survive. He had come to build an underground army inside Auschwitz. For nearly 3 years he lived the nightmare. Starvation, disease, gas chambers, medical experiments. He organized a secret network. They smuggled food, medicine, and most importantly, information. Tiny scraps of paper hidden in bread crusts or sewn into clothing. Reports on mass murder. Details on the final solution. He compiled the first eyewitness accounts of systematic extermination and got them to the Polish government in exile in London. The resistance inside the camp grew to hundreds. They sabotaged the crematoria. They planned escapes. Pilecki himself escaped in April 1943 after 2.5 years. One of the few who ever broke out of Auschwitz alive. He reached Warsaw, delivered his reports in person, and immediately joined the 1944 Warsaw Uprising. He fought house to house as the city burned. No one expected the quiet cavalry officer who chose to enter Auschwitz to become one of the most important witnesses of the Holocaust, and one of its most relentless fighters. But then the war turned again. The Soviets arrived. Pilecki, still fighting for a free Poland, was arrested by the new communist regime. They called him a traitor. In 1948 he was executed with a bullet to the back of the head. His reports sat in classified files for decades. The world only learned the full story long after he was dead. 2 men. 2 oceans of blood. 2 impossible choices that changed history. John Paul Jones fled Scotland a wanted killer and returned as the father of the American Navy. Witold Pilecki walked into Auschwitz a volunteer and walked out carrying proof of the century's greatest crime. But while one man fought at sea and another inside the wire, a third was about to risk everything from behind a desk in a quiet Lithuanian consulate. July 1940. Kaunas, Lithuania. The Soviet Union had just swallowed the Baltic states. Nazi Germany stood on the horizon. Jewish families poured into the city, desperate for any way out. Chiune Sugihara was the Japanese consul. A career diplomat. A family man. No one expected him to become one of the greatest rescuers of the Holocaust. Tokyo had issued strict orders. Visas only for those with clear destinations and financial means. Sugihara's cables requesting exceptions were denied. The Jews arriving had neither. Sugihara began writing visas by hand. Hundreds. Then thousands. He worked from dawn until midnight, ignoring telegrams from superiors. He signed documents for people he had never met, people with no connection to Japan, people heading nowhere but away from the Nazis. He even wrote visas for those already on the train platform, leaning out the window of the consulate as the last train prepared to leave. His staff begged him to stop. His wife worried. The Japanese Foreign Ministry warned him of career ruin. Sugihara kept writing. By the time the consulate closed in August 1940, he had issued more than 2,000 visas, many to entire families. Historians estimate those visas saved between 6,000 and 10,000 lives. He was fired, stripped of his pension, forced into poverty. For decades Japan barely acknowledged what he had done. Sugihara died in 1986, still unrecognized by his own government. Only years later did the truth emerge. The quiet diplomat who defied an empire from a desk had become one of history's most unlikely saviors. But then the war found its way to the Pacific. May 1945. Okinawa. Hacksaw Ridge. The Japanese held the high ground. American Marines had already taken horrific casualties trying to take the escarpment. Among the soldiers climbing that hill was a man no one wanted in the fight. Desmond Doss was a Seventh-day Adventist conscientious objector. He refused to carry a weapon. He refused to work on Saturday. The army tried to discharge him. He refused to leave. They made him a medic. His own unit mocked him, called him coward, left Bibles in his bunk. On May 5, Japanese forces counterattacked. Grenades and machine gun fire tore through the ridge. Dozens of Americans fell. Doss stayed. Alone. Under direct fire. He lowered wounded men down the 400-foot cliff one by one using a rope system he improvised on the spot. 75 men. He carried them, dragged them, prayed over them, then went back up for more. He was wounded multiple times. Shrapnel in his legs. A bullet through his arm. Still he refused to leave the line. When a grenade landed near him, he threw himself on another soldier to shield him. The blast tore into his body. He still crawled to help others. By the end of the battle, Doss had saved more lives than any other soldier on the ridge, without ever firing a shot. The same men who had mocked him recommended him for the Medal of Honor. President Truman pinned it on his chest. The first conscientious objector ever to receive it. The man the army didn't want became the hero no one could ignore. 4 lives. 4 impossible paths. John Paul Jones, the murderer who became the father of the American Navy. Witold Pilecki, the man who chose Auschwitz and lived to tell the world. Chiune Sugihara, the diplomat who ruined his career to save thousands. Desmond Doss, the pacifist who conquered hell without a gun. No one expected any of them. History had other plans. The pattern is brutal in its simplicity. The most unlikely heroes never looked the part. They were the young sailor with blood on his hands. The Polish officer who walked into the death camp on purpose. The Japanese bureaucrat who said no to his own government. The gentle medic everyone called coward. They did not seek glory. They did not plan to become legends. They simply refused to look away when the moment came. One man killed to keep order and later fought for a revolution. Another volunteered for hell to expose it. One wrote visas while the world burned. One carried the wounded while bullets flew. What they all shared was the same shocking reversal. The very thing that made them unfit became the reason they succeeded. Jones's ruthless discipline turned into naval brilliance. Pilecki's quiet courage built a resistance inside the impossible. Sugihara's sense of duty defied orders. Doss's faith gave him the strength to keep climbing. The wars ended. The medals were pinned. The survivors told their stories. And the world finally caught up, often too late. John Paul Jones died in Paris in 1792, alone and nearly forgotten, only to be exhumed decades later and return to America as a hero. Pilecki was executed by the communists he had fought against, his reports buried until the fall of the Soviet Union. Sugihara lived in obscurity until Israeli survivors tracked him down in the 1980s and honored him as righteous among the nations. Doss spent the rest of his life quietly, still refusing to carry a weapon, still the same gentle man the army once tried to break. The irony cuts deep. The people history least expected became exactly who it needed. The murderer who gave a navy its soul. The prisoner who exposed the Holocaust from inside. The diplomat who saved more Jews than almost any other single person. The medic who proved courage does not require a rifle. These are not stories of perfect men. They are stories of flawed men who, when the world demanded the impossible, simply said yes anyway. They did not ask to be heroes. They simply refused to be anything else. And that is why they remain the most unlikely heroes in history. The kind no one ever sees coming, until it is already too late to stop them. All facts drawn exclusively from verified historical records, military citations, survivor testimonies, diplomatic archives, and court documents.